tires screamed as rain hammered the boulevard, and the car lurched to the curb where Emma Carter clutched the wheel like it might explain the ache in her chest. She shoved the door and stumbled into the downpour, blinking through neon streaks. Liam Carter laughed, and Sophie Bennett's hand found his as if it had always lived there. The city's noise thinned to a siren tone, and Emma whispered, "Tell me this isn't real." But the air answered with thunder. Liam said, "Go home, Emma," and the sentence sliced cleaner than the rain. Sophie glanced back, eyes bright, a dare hiding under pity. Emma's phone chimed, lighting a thread of sweet messages that now burned like ash. She tried to breathe, counting lights in a puddle, but the reflection kept breaking. Liam turned away, shoulders easy, and Emma felt the floor of her life swing open. Sophie said, "This was never about you," and the words echoed like glass in her throat. Emma didn't cry. She only stood there and felt the lie settle into her bones. The curb felt like a thin ledge between the life Emma defended and the truth unraveling with every raindrop. She steadied herself and tasted metal, a memory of kitchen laughter turning sour. Liam said, "You always wanted too much," and the echo rang inside the car she had cleaned that morning. Sophie laughed softly. A bell that belonged to another room, another world. Emma imagined the calendars, the school lists, the patient notes on the fridge. She wanted to call Daniel Ortiz, but the shame tied her throat in a sailor's knot. A bus brake sighed, and the steam rose like a curtain closing. Emma said, "This isn't who we promised to be," and her voice startled her. Liam did not turn. The city did not soften. She stood straighter and learned how silence can roar when a heart breaks in public. Emma slid back into the driver's seat and felt the car hold her like a tired friend. The heater wheezed, failing against the flood, and the cabin smelled of wet fabric and old peppermint. She watched the mirror as Liam and Sophie vanished into a smear of light. She remembered the day they painted the nursery and the way he joked with paint on his nose. The joke now sounded like a stranger using his voice. Her phone chimed again, a calendar alert reminding her to pick up flowers. She laughed once, a brittle sound. She typed Daniel's name, then erased it, then typed it again. "I can't fall apart here," she said, and the words made a small shelter. She switched off her ringtone and let the rain do the talking. The engine coughed alive, and Emma pulled from the curb with care that felt ceremonial. She traced a slow path along the river where bridges wore necklaces of light. The city was 1,000 windows, and none of them kind. At a red light, she pictured Sophie's hand in Liam's, and a heat rose that wasn't anger, only clarity sharpening like winter air. She said, "I will not be erased," and the vow sat steady in the dash glow. A cyclist flashed by, water arcing from tires, and she realized she had already crossed some boundary inside herself. The lies were heavy, but their edges showed. She gripped the wheel, gentler now, and let the turn signal tick like a metronome for new time. Emma parked outside the apartment and sat with the engine off, listening to the building breathe. The stairwell bulb hummed, a patient insect trapped in amber. She thought of the photos on the hallway shelf, and wondered which ones were true. She carried the silence upstairs like a fragile bowl. At the door she paused, hand on the key, and heard her pulse in her ears. "You can step through or disappear," she told herself, and the choice clarified the night. She opened to the lavender scent she once loved. The room felt rearranged by an invisible hand. She closed the door and leaned against it until her breath belonged to her again. Emma sat at the kitchen table staring at the untouched cup of coffee that had gone cold hours ago. The morning sun fought its way through half-drawn blinds, striping the counter with reluctant light. She remembered birthday candles and anniversaries, once celebrated here, now mocked by silence. Her hands hovered over the family photo pinned to the fridge, each smile a mask she had not noticed before. "How long has this been a lie?" she whispered, but no answer returned. Daniel Ortiz had left her a message earlier, his voice warm, urging her to talk, but she wasn't ready to let the wound breathe. The room smelled of cinnamon and dust, familiar yet foreign. Every corner carried echoes of a trust that had slipped through her fingers like sand. Emma exhaled and told herself, "You will survive this." The words trembled, yet they stayed in the air like fragile scaffolding, holding her upright for one more hour. Later that afternoon, Emma walked through the park where she once brought her children to play. The autumn air carried scents of damp leaves and roasted peanuts from a nearby vendor. She sat on a bench worn smooth by years of waiting, eyes fixed on the swing set, moving without anyone in it. Liam's voice haunted her, replaying excuses layered with charm. She pressed her palms together, grounding herself against the storm within. An old couple strolled past, their fingers interlaced, and the sight cracked her chest wide open. She muttered, "Was it ever real for him?" The question floated into crisp air and was swallowed by the rustle of leaves. Her phone buzzed, Daniel's name flashing, but she let it fade. Emma leaned back, forcing herself to breathe with the rhythm of the wind. Every inhale was heavy, every exhale a fragile attempt to hold on to herself. Evening gathered as Emma stood at the supermarket aisle, surrounded by cereal boxes and fluorescent buzz. The ordinariness of the place pressed harder than any storm. She picked up Liam's favorite brand, then set it back sharply, as if burned. A woman nearby hummed to her child, and the sound twisted in her stomach. She imagined Sophie shopping with Liam, their laughter in a space like this. Her throat tightened until she whispered, "Not mine anymore." A cashier's smile at the end of the aisle reminded her of masks people wore. She grabbed essentials and moved quickly, fearing her tears might flood the tiled floor. The lights hummed louder, the air sterile and merciless. She thought of Daniel's steady patience but pushed it aside. Her basket felt like a stone, each item a memory she no longer wanted. Emma left the aisle with her heart splintering under fluorescent clarity. That night, Sarah Miller stopped by, her oldest friend, carrying a casserole Emma had not asked for, but desperately needed. "Hi, now I ate sting," Sarah said. "You don't have to talk, just eat." Emma tried to smile, but it faltered at her lips. Kitchen lights buzzed softly, filling the silence between them. Sarah's eyes flickered with questions she dared not ask, loyalty pulling her in two directions. Emma whispered, "He chose her." Sarah reached out, placing a hand over Emma's, warmth against cold. "You chose truth," Sarah answered. The words were steady, but her eyes betrayed the conflict of knowing both Liam and Emma too well. Emma studied Sarah's face and felt both comfort and distance. Trust was rare now, even with the ones who loved her. Still, the casserole's aroma softened the edges of grief, and for a brief moment, Emma allowed herself to feel held. The next morning, Emma walked to a small cafe tucked between brick buildings, the smell of espresso drifting onto the street. She sat by the window, notebook open, pen hovering without words. The world outside moved briskly, strangers unaware of the wreckage inside her chest. She wrote Liam's name, then crossed it out until the page tore. "Who am I now?" she whispered, her reflection in the glass answering with silence. A young barista placed her drink gently, smile soft as if sensing the storm within. Emma lifted the cup, its warmth grounding her in fragile present. She thought of rebuilding, of survival, of Daniel's quiet steadiness. The cafe's chatter blurred, becoming background to her thoughts. She sat still, pen resting, realizing she must learn herself again from the ground up. The morning sun touched her face, gentle but unrelenting, asking her to rise. Emma shuffled through a drawer of bills and old notes, the paper edges cutting deeper than they should. She paused when she found Liam's jacket receipt dated weeks ago, far from the city he claimed to be working in. The number scribbled on the back wasn't hers, and the truth coiled tighter. She pressed the slip against her chest, heartbeat pounding. "How many nights did I sleep while you lied?" she whispered. The house was too quiet, and every tick of the clock mocked her. She poured a glass of water, but could not swallow past the lump in her throat. Memories of him promising forever clashed with the evidence in her hands. Her chest felt split open, and she realized that trust had died quietly long before tonight. She dropped into the chair, dizzy with betrayal, gripping the receipt like a blade that would not let go. Later, Emma sat at her desk scrolling through Liam's old emails. Her stomach twisted as phrases repeated, words of affection sent to Sophie as if copy-pasted from their own vows. Every keystroke echoed in her ears like a hammer. Her hand shook as she scrolled, reading promises of getaways and whispers about a future never meant for her. So, every smile was rehearsed, she muttered bitterly. The glow of the screen painted her face blue, her tears catching light like glass. The room grew smaller, suffocating with each revelation. She slammed the laptop shut, but the words had already branded her mind. She leaned back, pressing her palms over her eyes, wishing for silence. Yet silence only repeated Liam's betrayal louder. She inhaled sharply and realized she could never unknow what she had read. Emma drove across town, heart racing, parking near the cafe Liam had mentioned weeks ago. Through the window she saw Sophie seated with him, laughing at something she would never hear. The sight hit like a physical blow, air driven from her chest. She gripped the steering wheel until her knuckles ached. "They chose to meet here so casually," she whispered. She wanted to storm inside, but fear held her. She watched their heads bend closer, Liam's smile unburdened. She pressed her forehead to the wheel, sobbing into the leather. A stranger knocked gently on her window, asking if she was all right, but she waved them away. She could not bear kindness while watching her life burn through the glass. She finally drove off, headlights streaking through her tears. Back home, Sarah returned, worry etched across her brow. Emma sat curled on the couch, eyes swollen from crying. Sarah asked, "Do you want me to stay?" Emma nodded, unable to speak. Sarah wrapped a blanket around her, anchoring her to the world. "You don't deserve this," Sarah whispered fiercely. Emma wanted to believe, but the betrayal had buried doubt into her marrow. Sarah's presence felt both comforting and painful, reminding her of everything she lost. "He gave her my life," Emma said, voice thin as paper. Sarah squeezed her hand, torn between loyalty to truth and love for Emma. The silence between them held both rage and grief. For the first time, Emma allowed herself to lean on someone else without apology. The night passed heavy, but not alone. The next day, Emma met Daniel Ortiz outside the hospital where he worked. His voice was steady, offering her quiet strength she had forgotten existed. He said, "You can't heal in silence." She resisted, afraid of unraveling in front of him. Daniel's gaze carried no judgment, only patience. "They broke your trust, not your worth," he told her softly. Emma's eyes welled, and she looked away, ashamed of her fragility. He placed a gentle hand on her shoulder, steady and grounding. She whispered, "I don't know who I am anymore." Daniel replied, "You're someone who will stand again." His words felt like a fragile bridge toward herself. She realized that truth could cut, but it could also stitch. For the first time since the storm began, hope flickered through the wreckage. Emma stood by the window while night pressed its forehead to the glass. Her phone vibrated, and the name she had avoided for years glowed like a flare. Margaret said, "I should have told you sooner," and the room tilted. Emma braced the sill as rain stitched faint lines across the street. Margaret's breath crackled with distance and regret. She said, "Your father is not the man who raised you." The floor inside Emma shifted, old memories sliding like plates in an earthquake. "Why now?" Emma asked, but the answer arrived like a bruise. Margaret said, "Because Liam knew." The words struck harder than the storm. Emma stared at the fridge magnets and saw life arranged by someone else's hands. She said, "You let me build a home on sand." Margaret sobbed softly, a sound like paper tearing. Emma felt the lie reach back through time and lock the doors she once trusted. Morning found Emma in a corner booth of the old diner where holidays once ended in pie. Margaret slid across from her, smaller than memories allowed. The chrome napkin holder doubled their worried faces. Emma said, "You gave him my secrets." Margaret touched the rim of her coffee and could not meet her eyes. She said, "I told Liam when he proposed because I feared history repeating." Emma tasted metal again and pushed the cup away. Margaret whispered, "Richard Hale is your father, and Sophie works at his firm." The room narrowed to a point of light. Emma said, "So Sophie knew me before I knew myself." Margaret flinched, then nodded, grief moving like a tide in her chest. The waitress asked about eggs, and the ordinary question split the moment in two. Emma folded her hands to keep from shaking apart. Back home, Emma laid folders across the table like surgical tools. Bank statements bled into emails, all traced to Liam's careful hand. A retainer from Hale and Wolcott glinted in the lamplight, a signature she recognized from the diner name. She said, "You mapped my life against a ledger." The heater clicked and fell silent, as if listening. She read notes about a trust she had never heard of, clauses praising discretion, dates that matched their anniversaries too neatly. Her throat burned. "You married access," she said, and the clock answered with a hollow tick. She followed the arrows he had drawn, a flow of money that curved towards Sophie's department. The lie was not a sudden flood. It was irrigation, steady and precise. Emma pressed a palm to the table and felt it steady her like a vow. Emma met Daniel at a quiet clinic room between shifts, walls humming with vented air. She told him the names, the firm, the years, the trust. Daniel said, "They built a maze to keep you doubting your steps." She drew a line on scrap paper, turning dates into a spine. He circled the first lie and said, "Start here." Emma let the pen hover, then wrote her own name in darker ink. He added, "Truth may hurt, but it does not vanish when you face it." She nodded, surprised by the breath returning to her chest. Daniel's calm did not erase pain, but it gave it edges she could hold. "I will confront him," she said, and the room felt larger. Daniel's smile was small and honest, a lantern in bad weather. She folded the page and slipped it into her coat like a compass. Dusk pooled in the street when Emma's phone rang again, the screen a quiet command. Margaret said, "There's more," and each syllable carried years. She confessed that Richard had paid Liam's firm to keep the past sealed. She added one final fracture. "Sophie is Richard's daughter." The world tipped and steadied, then tipped again. Emma gripped the railing outside her building and felt the metal bite. She said, "So she's my half-sister," and the truth fell between them like a bell. Cars passed, unaware of the collision no one could see. Margaret begged forgiveness that could not be rushed. Emma looked up and decided the sky would hold while she learned to stand in this new gravity. "I will face them," she said, and the night did not answer, but it listened. Emma stood before the mirror, adjusting her coat as though armor might form from fabric. She whispered, "This ends tonight," her voice steady for the first time. The room was dim, lit only by a lamp that flickered with the hum of old wiring. Memories of Liam's laughter haunted her reflection, yet they no longer bent her posture. She slipped the folder of documents into her bag, every page a weapon of truth. Her pulse raced, but beneath it was a calm resolve she had never felt before. She glanced once at the framed family photo, then turned it face down. She said, "No more lies will own me." Outside, the night was sharp with cold air, headlights carving silver streaks across the wet pavement. She pulled her coat tighter and walked into the dark with purpose, carrying both her wounds and her strength. Emma entered the restaurant where Liam and Sophie sat at a corner table, laughter spilling like broken glass. The clink of glasses and low murmur of patrons wrapped the betrayal in a cruel disguise. She walked with deliberate steps, heels striking tile like echoes of war drums. Liam looked up, his smile fading into caution, Sophie's lips tightening into a smirk. Emma placed the folder on the table, the sound sharp as a gavel. "You stole my life," she said, her tone clear and cold. Liam reached for her hand, but she pulled it back before his fingers touched. Sophie's laugh rang false, but her eyes gleamed with victory. Emma did not sit. She stood, letting silence bend the room toward her strength. Patrons glanced, sensing the storm behind the calm words. Liam reached across the table, voice pleading, "Emma, it isn't what you think." She leaned forward, eyes blazing, and said, "It's exactly what I think. You built everything on lies." Sophie crossed her arms, lips curling as if she enjoyed the theater. The folder lay open, exposing receipts and signatures, their secrets bleeding across linen. Liam's face lost color as he scanned the pages, his words faltering into silence. "I gave you trust," Emma said, "and you sold it." Sophie whispered, "He was mine before he was ever yours," venom dripping with every syllable. Emma's hands trembled, but her voice did not break. She stood taller, her shadow stretching across their table, declaring she was no longer the victim but the accuser. The restaurant's hum dulled, waiting for her next strike. Emma's voice rose sharper now, slicing through the din. "You knew about my blood, my family, every shadow I never saw. You let me drown while you held the rope." Liam shook his head, shame dragging his gaze to the table. Sophie's laugh fractured, uneasy under the weight of exposed truth. Emma pointed at her and said, "You aren't just the other woman, you are my sister." The words stunned Sophie, her smirk collapsing into disbelief. The silence that followed was louder than any scream. Liam's lips parted but no words came. Emma's breath steadied, fire meeting clarity. She turned her back on them both, leaving the folder behind like a verdict. Each step carried the sound of a final door closing. The world outside waited, raw and sharp, but it was hers again. Emma stepped into the night, her chest heaving as the air bit her lungs. The city roared, traffic streaming like restless veins of fire. She gripped a railing outside, her knuckles white but her spine unbroken. For the first time, she felt the weight of betrayal sliding off, leaving scars but also space. Daniel's words returned. "You will stand again." She whispered to herself, "I already am." Her tears mixed with the cold wind, but they no longer felt like defeat. Behind her, voices rose, but she did not turn back. Ahead, neon lights shimmered, uncertain yet alive, promising that she was no longer bound to shadows. The night carried her footsteps forward, each one cutting deeper into freedom. She left the lies behind in that room, carrying only her truth. Emma woke before the sun and listened to the apartment breathe. The city's hush felt like gauze wrapped around the night's wounds. She brewed coffee and watched the steam curl like a faint prayer. The folder on the counter lay shut, no longer a weapon, just paper. She said, "I am still here," and the words fit her mouth without shaking. She opened a window, letting cold air rinse the stale hurt. A sparrow landed on the sill, jittery and certain, then flew. Emma smiled at the ordinary courage. She wiped the counter, slow and deliberate, and gathered the scattered magnets back into a row. Liam's absence was no longer a cliff, it was a room she could cross. She whispered, "Let the truth stand," and turned off the kitchen light. Dawn brightened the walls, and she decided to meet the day as if it were an ally. Her chest rose, steady and new. Sarah arrived with grocery bags and a stubborn tenderness. She said, "You need breakfast and a plan," and set eggs on the counter like a truce. Emma laughed, light and surprised, and the sound felt possible. They cooked in a quiet rhythm, spatula and kettle keeping time. Sarah said, "I was angry at him, but I'm done giving him the room." Emma nodded and poured tea. "I want to keep what is mine," she said, and the sentence stood like a chair pulled out for her. Sarah hugged her, fierce and brief. "You are not a ruin," Sarah said, and the line settled warm. Emma wrote a simple list, small tasks that stacked like steps. They ate, forks tapping china, and the morning felt honest. Grief was present, but it no longer drove. Emma said, "Thank you for staying," and Sarah answered, "Always." The day opened its hand. At the cafe window, Noah Reed wiped the glass in slow arcs, while the street woke. He saw Emma and waved her to the corner table that held light kindly. He said, "Your usual and a fresh start," and set the cup down with a grin. Emma smiled because hope looked ordinary on him. She opened her notebook and wrote a page that did not mention Liam. Noah pointed to the community board and said, "We are hosting an open mic you should read." Emma shook her head, then paused. "Maybe," she said, tasting bravery. The room hummed with soft chatter and milk foam hiss. She read her words under her breath and felt them assemble a spine. Noah returned with a pastry she had not ordered. He said, "On the house for courage." Emma tore it in half and left the other piece for a later self. The morning held. Margaret waited on a park bench under bare branches, hands folded like a prayer she could not finish. Emma sat beside her, leaving a respectful inch of winter air. Margaret said, "I carried silence like an heirloom, and it made me small." Emma listened, letting the apology stand without hurry. Margaret added, "I wanted to spare you and I trapped you." Emma said, "I can hold the truth now." The wind rattled the branches, a gentle warning and a blessing. Margaret reached for her hand and stopped. Emma bridged the distance, palm to palm, brief and brave. "We start over," Emma said, and Margaret nodded, tears bright. The past remained unedited, but it no longer dictated tone. They sat while the light shifted, learning how to speak without fences. When they rose, the bench kept their warmth for a moment longer, like a witness willing to believe. Near sunset, Emma stood by the river where the city kept its reflections honest. Daniel joined her, footsteps quiet on the damp boardwalk. He said, "How does the air feel?" She answered, "Like mine." They leaned on the railing, shoulders almost touching, no rescue owed or expected. Daniel said, "Healing is motion, not a finish line." Emma let the water's slow muscle teach her breathing. "I am not what they did," she said, and the words rang clean. Daniel smiled, small and certain. He offered no map, only presence. Emma took the folded page from her pocket, the one that began with dates and ended with her name. She tore it gently and watched the pieces drift like pale birds. "Goodbye to the version that begged," she said. The sky warmed to gold and the river carried the fragments away. They stood until the cold asked them to move, and they did. Emma sat in her apartment alone, the clock ticking softly against the silence. She stared at the face-down photo frame, wondering if she should put it back upright. The air felt thick, yet there was a clarity she had not known before. She whispered, "I am still standing," and her voice surprised her with its steadiness. The loneliness was sharp, but it was also honest without disguise. She let herself sit still, breathing in the weight of her survival, fragile but real. Outside, the city hummed, alive with strangers who would never know her story, but she carried it all the same. At dawn, Emma walked along the quiet street, her breath forming clouds in the cold. The bakery opened its doors, the smell of bread spilling out. She paused, watching people gather, each carrying lives unknown to her. She realized the world kept moving regardless of her scars. She whispered, "So will I." Her steps were measured, careful, but they did not falter. The day belonged to her in a way it never had before. The betrayal was carved into her, but it was not the whole of her story. She held the chill and the promise of sunrise together in her chest. Emma stood at the bridge where the river stretched like a mirror of time. She leaned on the railing, watching the current carry fragments of leaves. She thought of every lie, every fracture, and how they had reshaped her. She said softly, "You didn't take everything," and her words drifted into the water. The air pressed cold against her cheeks, but she welcomed it. She understood that loss was permanent, but so was resilience. She stayed until the wind picked up, hair lifting like a flag she never meant to raise, but now claimed as her own. She turned, ready to go home. Later that evening, Emma lit a single candle on her table. She did not pray, but she sat with the flame, letting it keep her company. The quiet did not frighten her anymore. She wrote in her notebook, "I am more than the lies." Her handwriting shook, but the words stayed. She thought of Sarah, of Daniel, of Margaret, of every fracture and every hand that steadied her. She closed the notebook with a slow exhale. The flame flickered and bent with a draft, but it did not go out. Neither would she. She leaned back in her chair, eyes reflecting the small, unwavering light. The phone buzzed, Daniel's name glowing on the screen, but Emma let it ring. She wasn't ready for anyone's voice tonight. She set the phone down, folded her arms and sat in silence. The truth pressed close, but it no longer crushed her. She said to herself, "Alone is not the same as broken." Outside, the night stretched wide, stars faint above the city glow. She leaned her head against the chair and closed her eyes, letting the quiet hold her. The final realization came not as fire, but as steady stone. She had always been enough, even when no one stayed.